What happens when security guards refuse to let a black woman enter a corporate building, only to discover that her investment firm owns 80% of the company and she's about to decide their fate? The stories we tell ourselves about strangers, the real-life moments that shatter every assumption. This touching story reminds us that appearances can hide the most shocking truths. Have you ever judged someone so completely that it could have destroyed your entire world? Welcome to the Obsidian Financial Complex, 63 floors of Lake Michigan's most exclusive investment empire. The kind of building where the monthly elevator maintenance budget exceeds a teacher's annual salary. Camera sweeps through the imposing glass and steel structure, morning light reflecting off its dark surface. The morning rush was just beginning at Obsidian Financial Complex, but security guard Carlos Mendoza had already been at his post for 2 hours. 12 years of protecting Chicago's financial elite had taught him to spot trouble before it walked through those revolving glass doors. His partner, Kevin Walsh, was newer to the job, only 3 years, but he'd learned fast. Together, they formed the first line of defense for some of the most powerful investment firms in the Midwest. "Another beautiful morning in paradise," Carlos muttered, adjusting his tie as he watched suited executives stream past their marble security desk. The lobby was a monument to wealth. Imported Italian marble floors that cost more than most people's houses, crystal chandeliers that required a team of specialists to clean, and abstract art pieces that sold for millions at Sotheby's auctions. 7:23 a.m. timestamp appears on screen. That's when she walked in. Zara Washington moved through the revolving doors with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere she went. But to security guards Carlos and Kevin, she looked completely out of place. Dark jeans, white sneakers, a simple black backpack slung over one shoulder, and a worn leather jacket that had seen better days. In a building where a $1,000 suit was considered business casual, she might as well have been wearing a neon sign that said, "Doesn't belong here." Zara Washington. To the security guards, she looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong building. They had no idea they were looking at one of the most powerful women in American finance. Zara approached the security desk with easy stride, her natural confidence somehow making the marble floors seem less intimidating. She pulled out her phone, a latest model iPhone in a simple case, and glanced at the time. 7:24 a.m. Perfect timing. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who'd been up since 4:30 a.m. reviewing quarterly reports and market projections from Tokyo and London. Carlos looked up from his newspaper, the Wall Street Journal, which he read religiously every morning, despite understanding about half of the financial jargon. "Good morning. Can I help you?" "I'm here for the 7:30 meeting at Pinnacle Investment Group, 58th floor." Kevin's eyebrows shot up. Pinnacle's morning meetings were executive-only affairs. Board members, C-suite executives, and their elite clients. The kind of people who arrived in black cars with drivers wearing suits that cost more than Kevin's monthly rent. "Ma'am," Kevin said carefully, "Pinnacle doesn't typically have walk-in appointments. Are you sure you have the right building?" Zara smiled, the kind of patient smile she'd perfected over years of dealing with assumptions about her age, her appearance, and her right to be in certain spaces. "I'm quite sure. Zara Washington. I should be on the visitors list." Carlos pulled up the building's visitor management system on his computer. The morning list for Pinnacle was short, 3 scheduled arrivals, all with corporate titles and advanced security clearance. No Zara Washington anywhere. "I don't see your name here, miss. Are you sure about the time? Maybe it's later in the day?" 7:30, Zara confirmed, checking her watch. Not a Rolex or Omega like the executives who passed through these doors, but a sleek Apple Watch Ultra in titanium. Carlos caught a glimpse of it and filed away the detail. Expensive smartwatch, but still not the kind of timepiece that screamed board member. Kevin leaned forward slightly. "What kind of meeting, if you don't mind me asking? Are you from a vendor company or—" The question hung in the air.
heavy with assumptions. Zara had heard variations of it hundreds of times throughout her career. The polite way of asking, "What are you really doing here?" "I'm attending the quarterly board meeting," she said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. Carlos actually stopped typing. Kevin's mouth fell open slightly before he caught himself. "Ma'am," Carlos said slowly, "the Pinnacle Investment Group board meeting is, well, it's exclusively for board members, senior executives, people who—" He gestured vaguely at her attire, trying to find a diplomatic way to express what he was thinking. "People who what?" Zara asked, her voice still pleasant but with a subtle edge that made both guards shift uncomfortably. "People who, dress the part," Kevin finished, immediately regretting the words as they left his mouth. Zara nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And what part would that be?" The lobby around them was filling with the morning rush. Executives in $3,000 suits carrying briefcases that cost more than most people's cars. Women in designer dresses and heels that clicked authoritatively across the marble floors. The contrast between their appearance and Zara's casual attire was stark, and both guards were acutely aware of it. "Look, Miss Washington," Carlos tried again, his tone softening. "I'm not trying to give you a hard time, but Pinnacle Investment Group, they manage over $120 billion. Their board members are some of the most powerful people in finance. They don't just show up casually." "Interesting," Zara mused. "And you've met all the board members personally?" Kevin shook his head. "Well, no, but we see them coming and going. We know what to expect." "And what do you expect?" The question was simple, but it cut straight to the heart of their assumptions. Carlos found himself struggling to articulate what he meant without sounding discriminatory. Professional appearance, executive presence, the kind of people who fit. Fit where? "In that world," Kevin added, gesturing toward the elevators that led to the upper floors. "The high finance world, billion-dollar decisions, boardroom politics." Zara checked her watch again. 7:26 a.m. 4 minutes until the meeting she'd been preparing for all week, the quarterly review that would determine the future of 3 major acquisitions and potentially reshape entire industries. "Gentlemen, I appreciate your concern about my appearance, but I really do need to get upstairs." Carlos hesitated. "Ma'am, without proper authorization or escort from Pinnacle Investment Group staff, I can't allow access to the 58th floor. Building policy." "What would constitute proper authorization?" "Photo ID, advance visitor clearance, or escort by a verified Pinnacle employee." Zara reached into her backpack and pulled out her wallet. Expensive leather, Carlos noted, though he couldn't identify the brand. She handed over her driver's license. "Zara Washington, age 34, Chicago address," Carlos read aloud. "That confirms your identity, but it doesn't resolve the authorization issue." Kevin studied the license carefully. Upscale address? Lincoln Park? That was where a lot of successful professionals lived, but it wasn't the Gold Coast where true financial elite resided. Still respectable, but not screaming board member. "The address checks out," Kevin admitted, "but we still need verification from Pinnacle that you're expected." "Then call them." "Ma'am, it's 7:27 a.m. Most assistants don't start until 8 or 8:30. "Try the direct line." Carlos hesitated. Calling Pinnacle Investment Group at this hour felt presumptuous. These weren't people you bothered with security desk inquiries. They were masters of the universe, titans of industry, economic power brokers who moved markets with single decisions. "I don't think that's appropriate," he said. Zara's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, a text message that both guards could partially see. "Zara, conference room ready. Eleanor is asking for your ETA." "Eleanor?" Kevin asked, having caught the name. Eleanor Sterling. She's expecting me. Both guards knew that name. Eleanor Sterling, Chief Executive Officer of Pinnacle Investment Group, one of the most powerful women in American finance. Featured on Forbes covers, invited to speak at Davos, consulted by Federal Reserve governors. The idea that she was personally waiting for the casually dressed woman in front of them seemed absurd. "You're telling us," Carlos said carefully, "that Eleanor Sterling is expecting you at a board meeting?" "I'm telling you I have a meeting. The specifics are confidential." Kevin's radio crackled to life. "Security desk, this is monitoring station. We're showing an unresolved visitor situation in the main lobby. Status report?" Carlos keyed his radio. "Copy that. We have an individual requesting access to Pinnacle Investment Group, working on verification." "Name of individual?" Carlos looked at Zara, then back at the radio. "Zara Washington claims to have a 7:30 board meeting." There was a pause on the radio, then, "Stand by for verification." The lobby continued to fill with morning arrivals. More executives, more expensive suits, more assumptions about who belonged in this world. Several people had noticed the interaction at the security desk. It was unusual for anyone to be delayed here for more than a few seconds. Margaret Chen, a senior analyst at Hartford Capital on the 34th floor, slowed her walk as she passed the security desk. She'd never seen the guards actually stop someone before. Usually, the building's exclusive reputation and intimidating atmosphere kept out anyone who didn't belong. "Everything all right here?" she asked, more out of curiosity than concern. "Just verifying an appointment," Kevin replied, diplomatically.
Margaret glanced at Zara, taking in her appearance with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent 15 years in high finance. Casual attire, confident posture, expensive smartwatch, quality leather goods. The combination was puzzling. Someone with money who chose not to display it in the traditional ways. "Pinnacle meeting?" Margaret asked. "That's what she claims," Carlos said quietly. Margaret's expression shifted. Pinnacle Investment Group was legendary for their exclusivity. Their board meetings were attended only by people whose net worth started with 9 figures. The idea that someone in jeans and sneakers was heading to their boardroom was unprecedented. "Interesting," Margaret murmured, continuing toward the elevators, but clearly intrigued. Zara watched the interaction with mild amusement. She'd seen this dynamic play out countless times. The assumption that financial power came with a specific uniform, a certain look, a particular way of presenting oneself to the world. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from a number she recognized. "Excuse me, I should take this," she said, answering the phone with a smile. "Good morning, Patricia." The voice on the other end was clear enough for both guards to hear. "Zara, where are you? Eleanor is getting impatient and the Tokyo markets are moving faster than we anticipated." "Just clearing up a small security matter in the lobby. Should be up shortly." "Security matter? Do you need me to come down?" Carlos and Kevin exchanged glances. The voice belonged to someone with authority. Crisp, professional, used to giving orders and having them followed immediately. "Not necessary," Zara replied. "I think we're about to resolve this." "Are you sure? I can have building management intervene." "Let's give them another minute or two." Zara ended the call and looked at both guards with a renewed patience. "Gentlemen, Patricia Morrison, Pinnacle's Chief Operations Officer, is wondering if you'd like her to come down and escort me personally." The name Patricia Morrison sent a chill through both guards. They'd never met her, but they knew the name from the building directory. Chief Operations Officer of the most powerful investment firm in the building. The kind of person who could have them fired with a single phone call. That won't be necessary," Carlos said quickly. "But ma'am, you have to understand our position. Pinnacle Investment Group handles billions of dollars. Security is paramount. We can't just let anyone—" "Anyone who looks like me?" Zara interjected gently. The question hit like a physical blow. Both guards realized they'd walked straight into territory they'd been trained to avoid. "That's not what I meant," Carlos protested. "What did you mean?" Kevin jumped in, trying to salvage the situation. We meant anyone without proper executive appearance, corporate dress code, professional presentation. And you determined that I lack professional presentation based on what? The lobby had grown busier, and more people were beginning to notice the extended conversation at the security desk. James Morrison from Wellington Financial was openly watching now, as was Linda Rodriguez from Apex Capital Management. Word was beginning to spread that something unusual was happening. Based on industry standards, expectations, the way things are done in this business. I see. And who established these standards? The guard's radio crackled again. Security desk, this is control room. We're monitoring increased lobby traffic around your position. Do you need supervisory assistance? Before Carlos could respond, Zara spoke up. Gentlemen, before you call your supervisor, I have a question. The guards looked at her expectantly. Are you familiar with the Illinois Corporate Discrimination Prevention Act, Section 12.4? The specificity of the legal reference made the guards pause. That wasn't casual knowledge. That was the kind of detailed legal information that came from extensive corporate training or legal consultation. Ma'am, Kevin said carefully, are you threatening legal action? I'm asking if you understand the legal framework governing discriminatory access policies in corporate buildings. Carlos's mouth drew dry. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or wounded pride. This was about potential lawsuits, federal investigations, career-ending mistakes. We're not discriminating, he said quickly. We're following building policy. And what specific building policy requires board members to dress in a particular style? The question hung in the air like smoke. Both guards realized they couldn't cite any specific policy that mandated expensive suits or traditional business attire. Their assumptions had been based on culture, expectations, and unwritten rules about who belonged in elite financial circles. Zara's phone buzzed with another text message. This one was visible to both guards. Zara, building security is reporting a situation in the lobby. Do you need intervention from management? Who's texting you? Carlos asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan Blackstone. He's on Pinnacle's board. Another name that made both guards feel sick to their stomachs. Jonathan Blackstone wasn't just on Pinnacle's board, he was one of the most respected investment strategists in the country. His quarterly letters to shareholders were required reading in business schools. His market predictions moved billions of dollars. You're in direct contact with board members? Kevin asked.
I'm in direct contact with several people who are wondering why I'm not upstairs yet. The lobby continued to buzz with morning activity, but now there was an undercurrent of curiosity about the situation at the security desk. More executives were slowing their pace, pretending to check phones or adjust briefcases while trying to overhear the conversation. Robert Kim from Meridian Asset Management approached the desk casually. Morning, Carlos. Everything okay here? Just verifying an appointment, Mr. Kim. Robert glanced at Zara, his trained eye taking in every detail. Like Margaret Chin, he was puzzled by the combination of casual attire and confident bearing. In 15 years of high-stakes finance, he'd learned to read people quickly and accurately. This woman didn't fit any category he recognized. Pinnacle meeting? He asked. Board meeting, supposedly, Kevin said quietly. Robert's eyebrows shot up. Board meeting? That's Eleanor Sterling's inner circle. Billionaire territory. The comment wasn't meant to be offensive, but it highlighted exactly what both guards had been thinking. Pinnacle's board meetings weren't just exclusive, they were legendary. The combined net worth of attendees typically exceeded the GDP of small countries. Interesting timing, Robert continued. They're deciding on the Technotron acquisition today, $68 billion deal, biggest tech acquisition in history. Zara smiled slightly at the mention of Technotron. She'd been working on that acquisition for 8 months. Her analysis had identified Technotron as undervalued by approximately $12 billion, making it the deal of the century for whoever could secure it. Big meeting, she agreed. Robert studied her more carefully. There was something about her reaction, not surprise or intimidation, but familiarity, like someone who knew exactly what the Technotron acquisition meant and why it mattered.
You work in tech? I work in investments. What firm? Zara checked her watch again. 7:29 a.m. 1 minute until the meeting that would determine the future of 3 major acquisitions and reshape the technology industry. Gentlemen, she said, addressing the security guards, I'm going to be late for a very important meeting. What do we need to do to resolve this? Carlos looked at his computer screen, then at Kevin, then at the growing crowd of curious executives. The situation was spiraling beyond his comfort zone. In 12 years of security work, he'd never had to make a decision this consequential. Ma'am, I need to call my supervisor. Then make the call. Carlos reached for his radio, but before he could key the microphone, the elevator chimed. The doors opened, and out stepped Patricia Morrison, Chief Operations Officer of Pinnacle Investment Group. Patricia was everything the guards expected from a high-finance executive. Tailored Armani suit, Hermes bag, Louboutin heels clicking authoritatively across the marble floor. Her presence commanded immediate attention from everyone in the lobby. Zara, Patricia called out, her voice carrying across the space. There you are. Eleanor was starting to worry. She strode directly to the security desk, nodding politely to Carlos and Kevin. Gentlemen, I trust there hasn't been any confusion about Miss Washington's appointment. The guards looked at each other in growing horror. Patricia Morrison, one of the most powerful executives in the building, was personally escorting the woman they'd been treating as a potential intruder. Ma'am, we were just, Carlos stammered, following protocol? Protocol. What protocol requires board members to obtain special permission to enter their own building? Board members. The words hit like lightning bolts. Kevin felt his knees go weak. Board member? Patricia looked puzzled. Of course. Zara Washington, Pinnacle Investment Group board member and founding partner of Apex Strategic Holdings. She owns, well, that's confidential. The lobby had gone silent. Every executive within earshot had stopped moving, stopped talking, stopped pretending to not listen. The revelation that this casually dressed woman was not only a Pinnacle board member, but also a founding partner of another major firm was sending shockwaves through the morning crowd. Zara finally spoke, her voice carrying across the marble space with quiet authority. Gentlemen, I believe we have some important matters to discuss. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one nobody expects to be there, and sometimes that person has the power to change everything, including the careers of those who judge too quickly. But this story is just beginning, because what Carlos and Kevin don't know yet is that Zara Washington's investment firm doesn't just have a stake in the building's success, it owns the majority share of the entire Obsidian Financial Complex, and in about 30 minutes, she's going to decide whether they keep their jobs or lose everything they've worked for. The elevator carried Zara Washington to the 58th floor, but the shockwaves of what just happened were only beginning to ripple through the Obsidian Financial Complex. Carlos Mendoza and Kevin Walsh stood frozen at their security desk, surrounded by dozens of executives who had witnessed something unprecedented. The marble lobby buzzed with electric tension. Robert Kim pulled out his phone immediately, texting his team, "Emergency meeting in 10 minutes. Something massive just happened." Margaret Chen was already speed-dialing her managing director, her voice hushed but urgent. "Sir, we may have a serious situation developing." Carlos stared at the closed elevator doors, his 12 years of security experience providing no framework for what had just occurred. "Kevin," he whispered, "did Patricia Morrison just call her a board member?" Kevin was reviewing the visitor log on his computer screen, scrolling frantically through Pinnacle's registered board members. "I don't see her name anywhere in the system, Carlos. This doesn't make sense." But James Morrison from Wellington Financial, who had been quietly observing the entire interaction, stepped closer to the security desk. At 62, James had been in Chicago's financial district longer than anyone else in the lobby. He'd seen market crashes, corporate scandals, and the rise and fall of financial empires. "Gentlemen," James said quietly, "you might want to understand what just happened here." "Mr. Morrison," Carla said, recognizing one of the building's most respected tenants. "We were just following protocol." "Protocol," James laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Son, do you know what Apex Strategic Holdings is?" Both guards shook their heads. "Apex Strategic Holdings," James continued, his voice carrying across the increasingly crowded lobby, "is one of the most powerful private investment firms in North America. They specialize in acquiring controlling interests in real estate, technology, and financial services companies." Kevin felt his stomach drop. "Controlling interests?" "They don't just invest in companies," Margaret Chen added after finishing her phone call. "They buy them, quietly, systematically. And they have a particular focus on," she gestured around the marble lobby, "premium commercial real estate in major financial districts." Carlos's radio crackled. "Security desk, this is building management. We need immediate status report on the lobby incident." Before Carlos could respond, his supervisor, Director of Security Michael Torres, emerged from the elevators with two men in expensive suits. Torres looked grim, the expression of someone who just received very bad news from very important people. "Rodriguez, Walsh," Torres called out sharply, "conference room, now." But as they started to move, Linda Rodriguez from Apex Capital Management, who had been quietly making phone calls of her own, spoke up loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Gentlemen, before you go anywhere, you should know that Apex Strategic Holdings filed paperwork with the SEC 3 months ago." She held up her phone, showing a document. "They acquired a 79.6% controlling stake in Obsidian Financial Properties, LLC. The lobby went dead silent. "What does that mean?" Kevin whispered. Robert Kim answered, his voice carrying a mix of awe and horror. "It means Zara Washington doesn't just work in this building, she owns it." But the story was far from over, because at that exact moment, 58 floors above, Zara Washington was walking into the most important board meeting in Pinnacle Investment Group's history. The boardroom was a monument to financial power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of Lake Michigan. A conference table made from a single piece of Brazilian rosewood could seat 24 people. The walls displayed original paintings by Monet, Picasso, and Rothko, not reproductions, but actual masterpieces worth more than most companies' annual revenues. Eleanor Sterling sat at the head of the table, reviewing final documents for the Tektratron acquisition. At 59, she was one of the most respected CEOs in American finance, having built Pinnacle from a small Chicago investment firm into a global powerhouse, managing over $120 billion in assets. "Zara," Eleanor said as she entered, "I was starting to worry. Patricia mentioned some issue with building security." "Nothing that can't be addressed," Zara replied, taking her seat at Eleanor's right hand, the position traditionally reserved for the most senior board member. Around the table sat 12 of the most powerful people in finance. Jonathan Blackstone, whose market predictions could move entire sectors. Victoria Chen, who had orchestrated the largest private equity deal in history. Thomas Rodriguez, whose hedge fund had outperformed the S&P 500 for 14 consecutive years. Each person in this room controlled billions of dollars and could influence global markets with their decisions. But none of them knew what Zara was about to reveal. "Before we begin," Zara said, pulling out her laptop, "I have an announcement that will affect our discussion today." Eleanor looked curious. "What kind of announcement?" Zara opened her laptop and connected it to the room's presentation system. The wall-mounted display showed a document from the Securities and Exchange Commission dated 3 months ago. "I want to inform this board that Apex Strategic Holdings has completed its acquisition of Obsidian Financial Properties, LLC, the entity that owns and operates this building." The room fell silent. Several board members leaned forward, studying the document more carefully.
"Zara," Jonathan Blackstone said slowly,
Are you telling us that your investment firm now owns the Obsidian Financial Complex? 79.6% controlling interest, Zara confirmed. The acquisition was completed last Friday. Victoria Chen whistled softly. The entire building? That has to be worth $4.7 billion, Thomas Rodriguez finished, having done the math in his head. Jesus Christ, Zara. That's the largest real estate acquisition in Chicago's history. Eleanor Sterling sat back in her chair, processing the implications. Zara, this is extraordinary. But why are you telling us now? And what does this have to do with the Technotron deal? She clicked to the next slide. It showed a detailed analysis of every company in the Obsidian Financial Complex, their lease terms, their financial performance, and their strategic value. Because, Zara said, I've been conducting a comprehensive evaluation of our tenants, their business practices, their compliance with anti-discrimination policies, and their alignment with Apex Strategic Holdings' corporate values. She clicked again. The screen showed security camera footage from the lobby, timestamped 7:24 a.m. This morning, I experienced firsthand how certain employees in this building treat people who don't conform to their expectations about appearance, race, and social class. The board watched in silence as the security camera footage played. They could see Zara approaching the security desk, the guards' dismissive body language, their obvious skepticism about her right to be in the building. Patricia Morrison leaned forward. Zara, they didn't know who you were. Exactly, Zara replied. They made assumptions based solely on my appearance. Watch what happens next. The footage continued, showing the guards becoming increasingly dismissive, making comments about her attire, questioning whether she belonged in the building, and ultimately requiring intervention from Patricia herself. This is problematic, Eleanor said quietly. But Zara, surely this is just a training issue, a misunderstanding. She clicked to the next slide. It showed a detailed report titled Systematic Bias Analysis, Obsidian Financial Complex Security Protocols. Actually, Eleanor, this is part of a much larger pattern. Over the past 6 months, Apex Strategic Holdings has been documenting discriminatory practices throughout the building. Security protocols that disproportionately target people of color, elevator access restrictions that effectively segregate certain floors, visitor policies that create barriers for anyone who doesn't conform to traditional corporate appearance standards. Jonathan Blackstone studied the data on screen. Zara, how extensive is this analysis? 47 documented incidents of discriminatory behavior, 12 formal complaints filed by tenants and visitors, and a comprehensive legal analysis showing potential liability exceeding $200 million. The room erupted in whispered conversations. $200 million in potential discrimination liability was not just a legal problem. It was an existential threat to every company in the building. Thomas Rodriguez spoke up. Zara, what are you proposing? Zara stood and walked to the windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. 63 floors below, she could see Carlos and Kevin being escorted into what was probably the most uncomfortable meeting of their careers. I'm proposing that we use this opportunity to transform not just this building, but the entire financial district's approach to inclusion and diversity. She clicked to the next slide. The Obsidian Initiative, a comprehensive anti-discrimination framework. Every company in this building will implement mandatory bias training. Every security protocol will be reviewed and revised. Every hiring practice will be audited for discriminatory patterns. And every lease renewal will include specific diversity and inclusion requirements. Victoria Chen looked impressed. That's revolutionary, Zara. But what about companies that refuse to comply? Zara smiled, the same patient smile she'd given the security guards an hour earlier. Victoria, I control 79.6% of their building. Companies that refuse to comply will find their lease renewal applications rejected. Eleanor Sterling understood immediately. You're using your ownership position to force industry-wide change. I'm using my ownership position to create the kind of financial district I want to work in. The kind where a black woman in jeans can walk into any building without having her right to be there questioned. Patricia Morrison was reviewing the legal documents on her tablet. Zara, the legal analysis is sobering. If even half of these incidents resulted in lawsuits, which is why, Zara interrupted, I'm offering every company in the building a choice. Participate voluntarily in the Obsidian Initiative or face individual legal action for their role in systematic discrimination. The boardroom was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning system. 12 of the most powerful people in finance were processing the implications of what Zara had just proposed. Jonathan Blackstone was the first to speak. Zara, this goes far beyond corporate social responsibility. You're talking about fundamentally changing how business is conducted in one of the most important financial districts in America. Exactly. Thomas Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. The other buildings will have to follow suit. If Obsidian becomes known as the most inclusive, most progressive financial complex in Chicago, it will attract the best talent, the most innovative companies. That's the idea, Zara confirmed. Eleanor Skirling stood and joined Zara at the windows. What about the security guards? Carlos and Kevin, what happens to them? Zara was quiet for a moment, watching the morning traffic on Lakeshore Drive. That depends on whether they choose to be part of the solution or part of the problem. She clicked to the final slide, personal accountability and professional growth. I'm not interested in destroying careers. I'm interested in changing behavior. Carlos Mendoza and Kevin Walsh will have an opportunity to participate in comprehensive bias training, to understand how their assumptions affected not just me, but dozens of other people over the years. Patricia Morrison nodded approvingly. Redemption rather than retribution? But, Zara continued, if they choose to resist this opportunity for growth, if they maintain that their behavior was appropriate, then they'll face the consequences of their choices. Victoria Chen was studying the financial projections on her tablet. Zara, the cost of implementing this initiative across the entire building will be offset by reduced legal liability, increased tenant satisfaction, and enhanced reputation, Zara finished. The math works, the ethics work, and the long-term business case is overwhelming. Eleanor Sterling returned to her seat. All in favor of supporting the Obsidian Initiative? Every hand in the room went up immediately. Unanimous. Zara, you have Pinnacle's full support. Now, shall we discuss how this affects the Technotron acquisition? Zara smiled as she clicked to a new presentation. Actually, Eleanor, I think you'll find that Technotron's commitment to diversity and inclusion makes them an even more attractive acquisition target. Carlos and Kevin sat in a small conference room with Director Torres and two executives from building management. The conversation had not gone well. Gentlemen, Rebecca Walsh, Director of Tenant Relations, we've reviewed the security footage from this morning. Your behavior towards Ms. Washington was problematic on multiple levels. Torres nodded grimly. Discrimination based on appearance, assumptions about social class, and failure to follow proper verification protocols. But we didn't know who she was, Kevin protested. How are we supposed to know she was important? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Rebecca Walsh leaned forward. Kevin, that's exactly the problem. Why should someone's treatment depend on whether they're important? Why should respect be conditional on wealth or status? Carlos found his voice. Ms. Walsh, in 12 years of security work, I've never had a situation like this. Board members don't usually what? Rebecca interrupted. Don't usually dress casually? Don't usually look like Zara Washington? Don't usually challenge your assumptions about who belongs in elite spaces? Both guards realized they were in territory they couldn't navigate successfully. Every answer seemed to dig them deeper. Torres opened a folder containing several documents. This morning's incident is being reviewed not just by building management, but by Apex Strategic Holdings' legal team. They specialize in discrimination cases. Kevin felt his world collapsing. Legal team? Kevin, Carlos,
Rebecca said more gently. "You're not bad people, but your actions this morning were based on unconscious biases that could have serious legal consequences." She pulled out her tablet and showed them the same analysis Zara had presented to the Pinnacle Board. 47 documented incidents of discriminatory behavior in this building over 6 months. You two were involved in 8 of them. Carlos stared at the data in horror. 8? We never meant. Intent doesn't matter, Torres said flatly. Impact matters. And the impact of your behavior has been to make certain people feel unwelcome in their own workplace. Rebecca's phone buzzed. She glanced at the message and smiled slightly. "Gentlemen, Ms. Washington would like to speak with you personally." Both guards looked terrified. "She's coming down?" Kevin whispered. "She's inviting you upstairs." The elevator ride to the 58th floor was the longest of Carlos and Kevin's lives. Neither spoke as they rose through the heart of Chicago's financial district, past floors housing some of the most powerful companies in the world. When the elevator doors opened, they were greeted by Patricia Morrison, who escorted them to a smaller conference room adjacent to the main boardroom. The room was still intimidating, original artwork, leather chairs, windows overlooking the lake, but less overwhelming than the grand boardroom. Zara Washington sat at the conference table, but she was no longer wearing jeans and sneakers. She had changed into an impeccably tailored navy suit that probably cost more than both guards made in a month. The transformation was striking, not because the clothes made her more worthy of respect, but because they highlighted how arbitrary their earlier judgments had been. "Carlos, Kevin," Zara said, gesturing for them to sit. "Thank you for coming up."
"I want to start," Zara continued, "by acknowledging that this morning put you in a difficult position. You were trying to do your jobs, protect the building, follow what you believed were appropriate protocols." Carlos felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this would be less catastrophic than he'd feared. "But," Zara continued, "I also want you to understand the impact of your actions, not just on me, but on the dozens of other people who have faced similar treatment in this building." She slid 2 folders across the table. Each contained documentation of the 8 incidents Rebecca had mentioned: security delays, additional questioning, and elevated scrutiny that disproportionately affected people of color, women, and anyone who didn't conform to traditional corporate appearance standards. Kevin opened his folder and immediately recognized several of the documented incidents. "Miss Washington, we honestly didn't realize." "That's exactly the problem, Kevin. You didn't realize because you never had to think about it. When you're part of the group that belongs everywhere automatically, you don't notice the barriers faced by people who don't." Carlos studied the documents, seeing his own behavior from a completely different perspective. "Ma'am, what happens now?" Zara leaned back in her chair. "That depends on what you choose to do with this opportunity." "Opportunity?" "Carlos, Kevin, I could have you fired immediately. The legal case is overwhelming. The discrimination is well documented. Your employer would terminate you today to limit liability." Both men held their breath. "But I'm not interested in destroying careers. I'm interested in changing the culture that made this morning possible." She pulled out another document, a comprehensive training program outline. "The Obsidian Initiative includes a professional development track for security personnel. 6 months of intensive training on bias recognition, inclusive customer service, and cultural competency. Successful completion includes salary increases, career advancement opportunities, and the chance to become trainers for other buildings." Kevin stared at the document. "You're offering us training instead of termination?" "I'm offering you the chance to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem." Carlos found his voice. "What if we refuse?" Zara's expression didn't change, but her tone became more serious. "If you refuse, you'll face the full legal consequences of your actions: termination, potential civil liability, and difficulty finding future employment in building security." The choice was stark but fair. "But," Zara continued, "if you complete the program successfully, If you demonstrate genuine commitment to change, you'll have the opportunity to help train other security professionals across Chicago's financial district. Patricia Morrison, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Gentlemen, this is unprecedented. Ms. Washington is offering you the chance to turn a career-ending mistake into a career-defining opportunity." Carlos looked at Kevin, then back at Zara. "Why? Why give us this chance?" Zara was quiet for a moment, looking out at the Chicago skyline. "Because 12 years ago, I was a young black woman trying to break into finance. I faced assumptions, dismissals, and barriers every day. Some people helped me overcome them. Others maintained them." She turned back to face them. "I choose to be someone who helps people overcome barriers, even people who initially created them for me." Kevin felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Miss Washington, I have a daughter. She's 8 years old. I want her to grow up in a world where she's judged by her character instead of her appearance." Zara suggested gently, "Where she's judged by her character instead of her appearance." Kevin nodded. "Then help me create that world, Kevin." Carlos extended his hand across the table. "Ms. Washington, you have our commitment, complete commitment." Zara shook his hand, then Kevin's. "Then let's get started." The transformation was remarkable. Carlos and Kevin stood at their security desk, but everything about their approach had changed. They greeted every visitor with respect, asked clarifying questions instead of making assumptions, and had become models for inclusive customer service. A young Latina woman in business casual attire approached the desk, slightly nervous about her first interview at Meridian Asset Management. "Good afternoon," Carlos said with a warm smile. "How can I help you today?" "I have a 3 p.m. interview with Mr. Rodriguez." "Certainly. May I see your ID, please?" She handed over her driver's license, and Carlos processed it efficiently while Kevin called upstairs to confirm the appointment. "Miss Garcia, you're all set. Mr. Rodriguez's office is on the 34th floor. The elevators are just behind you. Good luck with your interview." "Thank you so much," she replied, visibly more relaxed. As she walked toward the elevators, Kevin turned to Carlos. "Remember when we would have assumed she was lost or in the wrong building?" Carlos nodded grimly. 6 months ago, we would have made her jump through hoops to prove she belonged here." Their transformation hadn't been noticed. The Obsidian initiative had exceeded every expectation, with discrimination complaints dropping to 0 and tenant satisfaction reaching all-time highs. Other buildings throughout Chicago's financial district were implementing similar programs, and Carlos and Kevin had become sought-after trainers. At 3:15 p.m., Zara Washington walked through the lobby, returning from a lunch meeting with potential Apex Strategic Holdings investors. She was dressed casually again, jeans, blazer, comfortable shoes, but now her appearance didn't raise any eyebrows. "Good afternoon, Ms. Washington," both guards said simultaneously. "Afternoon, Carlos and Kevin. How's the new training class going?"
"Fantastic," Kevin replied. "We're working with security teams from 5 other buildings this week. The feedback has been incredible." "And your daughter's school presentation?" Kevin beamed. She told her class that her dad helps make buildings more welcoming for everyone. She was so proud. Zara smiled. "She should be proud. You've both become leaders in this industry." As she headed toward the elevators, Carlos called out, "Miss Washington?" She turned back. "Thank you for giving us the chance to become better." "Thank you for taking that chance, Carlos." The Obsidian Initiative became the gold standard for inclusive corporate environments. Discrimination complaints across Chicago's financial district dropped by 89%. Employee satisfaction increased. Productivity soared. And 2 security guards who almost lost everything became champions of change. Carlos Mendoza and Kevin Walsh now travel throughout the Midwest, teaching other security professionals about the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect. They've trained over 2,000 security guards, and their program has been adopted by buildings in 12 major cities.
Zara Washington's investment firm, Apex Strategic Holdings, now manages over $340 billion in assets across 17 countries. But she considers the Obsidian initiative her greatest achievement, proof that one person's courage to challenge assumptions can transform entire industries. Sometimes justice arrives in the form of a quiet conversation at a security desk. Sometimes change begins with the simple question, why should respect be conditional on appearance? And sometimes the person you underestimate the most turns out to be exactly who you need to learn from. The next time you see someone who doesn't fit your expectations, ask yourself, what assumptions am I making? What barriers am I creating? What opportunities am I missing? Because the most powerful transformations don't happen in boardrooms or courthouses. They happen in everyday moments when ordinary people choose courage over comfort, growth over defensiveness, and inclusion over exclusion. What assumptions will you challenge today? The revolution starts with recognition. The change starts with choice, and the transformation starts with you.